Across a cozy living room, sunlight streaming through the curtains, casting a warm glow on everything it touches. Daniel, a man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a rugged charm, is sitting on the couch, smiling as he watches his wife, Emily, laugh softly at something on her phone. Their home is the picture of tranquility, the scent of fresh coffee in the air, family photos hanging on the walls, and the sound of a distant clock ticking steadily. Daniel looks at Emily with love in his eyes. She's beautiful, graceful, the kind of woman who could light up a room without even trying. He's worked hard to build this life with her. His steady job, their little home, the quiet dinners they share. Everything is exactly as it should be. I still can't believe how lucky I am. Emily glances up from her phone, offering him a warm smile. She doesn't say anything, but her eyes say it all. They've been married for 5 years, and their routine is simple. Dinners together, walks in the park, nights spent curled up on the couch. Daniel believes this is all he's ever wanted. He rests his hand on hers, feeling the familiar warmth of her touch. But for a brief moment, something shifts. It's so subtle he almost misses it. Her hand feels slightly stiff beneath his, her smile a little too quick. He shakes off the thought, chalking it up to the stresses of life. But deep down, something feels off. Over the next few weeks, Daniel starts to notice things. Little things. Emily has been more distracted, more distant. She doesn't laugh as easily at his jokes, doesn't respond to his touch the way she used to. At first, Daniel brushes it off. Life is busy. Maybe she's just tired. Are you all right? You've been so quiet lately. Emily looks up, startled, as if pulled from a daydream. She forces a smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes. I'm fine, just busy. Work's been draining, you know. But her words don't convince him. The way she avoids his gaze, the way she pulls away when he gets too close. There's an emotional distance growing between them, and Daniel feels it in the pit of his stomach. Lucas, Daniel's best friend, has been a constant presence in their lives. He's the kind of guy who lights up a room with his easy smile and infectious laughter. Tall, charming, with a natural charisma that draws people in. He's always been there for Daniel, through thick and thin. Tonight, as usual, Lucas is over for dinner. The three of them are sitting around the table, chatting about life, work, and everything in between. But something feels off. Lucas's jokes come a little too easily, his laughter a little too loud. Daniel watches him, his loyal friend, who's always had his back. But tonight, there's an edge to the way he's looking at Emily. It's hard to pinpoint, but Daniel can't shake the feeling that there's something more going on. Daniel makes an effort to engage with Emily, but she's always distracted. She's distant, her mind seemingly elsewhere. When he tries to start a conversation, she responds with quick, clipped answers. Her focus is on the television, or her phone, or the endless to-do list in her head. His heart tightens. He wonders if it's something he's done, something he's missed. He wants to believe everything is fine, that it's just a phase, but deep down, a nagging voice tells him that it's not. Something is wrong. Lucas comes over more often now, almost as if he's trying to fill the space that Emily's absence has created. The three of them sit together, sharing meals, playing games, laughing. But as Daniel watches them interact, he begins to feel a strange discomfort in his chest. Lucas's presence has always been a source of comfort, but now it feels like something more. He trusts Lucas completely, admires him, and has never once doubted his friendship. And yet, the way Lucas looks at Emily now, it's different. It's too knowing, too familiar. But Daniel doesn't say anything. He doesn't want to overthink it. After all, they're friends, family even. The days roll on, and the routine continues. Dinner, laughs, smiles. But beneath the surface, things are slowly shifting. Daniel feels it, but he pushes the thought away each time. He has everything he's ever wanted. Why would anything change? Yet deep down, he knows the storm is coming. The cracks are widening, and he can feel the tension building, even if he doesn't fully understand why. The calm before the storm. But the question remains, how long can this perfect facade last? Daniel is at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee as he scrolls through his phone. Emily is in the living room, her back to him as she fiddles with her phone. Her fingers move quickly over the screen, her eyes focused, but she doesn't notice Daniel watching. Daniel, softly, thinking. She's been like this more often. A sudden buzz from her phone breaks the silence. She doesn't look at it. Instead, she continues typing, her movements growing more guarded. Daniel's eyes flicker to the screen. The name Lucas flashes briefly before Emily swipes it away. Daniel, under his breath. Another late-night message? He shakes his head, pushing the thought away. But the discomfort lingers. It's not like Emily to hide her phone. They've always been open with each other. But now, she's more distant. Her excuses for staying late at work seem flimsy, and she avoids his questions with practiced ease. The tension between them grows with each passing day, and Daniel starts to feel it. The quiet space that has replaced the closeness they once shared. Lucas is over again, his laughter echoing through the house as he and Daniel sit together in the living room. Emily is in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring something on the stove. Lucas talks about a new job offer, but Daniel's mind drifts, feeling the weight of the growing unease in his chest. Lucas notices, pausing mid-sentence. He raises an eyebrow, his charming grin still in place. Lucas say, "Hey, what's on your mind, man?" Daniel, "Nothing. Just thinking." But something about Lucas's easygoing presence doesn't sit right with Daniel today. There's a new intimacy between Emily and Lucas. The way they exchange knowing glances, the way Lucas lingers just a little too long when they hug goodbye. Daniel tries to brush it off, not wanting to seem paranoid. But the doubts are growing harder to ignore. A few days later, Daniel decides to stop by Lucas's place. They've always had an open-door policy between the two, and Daniel doesn't think much of it. As he steps inside, the casual conversation flows, but then something catches his eye. On the kitchen counter, beneath a pile of magazines, lies a bracelet. It's delicate, gold, and familiar. His eyes widen as he recognizes it. That's Emily's. His heart skips a beat. The bracelet he gave her on their anniversary years ago. The one she always wore. The one she never took off. Daniel's throat tightens, a chill creeping down his spine. But he quickly shakes it off, trying to convince himself that it could be a mistake. Maybe it was a gift from someone else. Maybe it just looks like hers. But deep down, he knows. That night, Daniel can't stop thinking about the bracelet. The unease grows into something deeper, an ache that gnaws at him. He watches Emily more closely now, his mind racing every time she leaves the room, every time her phone rings. Her excuses for being late seem less convincing. Her eyes avoid his when he asks her where she's been, and his suspicions continue to build. He tries to ignore it, to tell himself it's nothing, but doubt seeps into every corner of his mind. Am I crazy? Or is something really happening? Daniel can't take it anymore. The constant uncertainty, the gut-wrenching suspicion, it's driving him mad. He decides, in that moment, to confront it, to face whatever truth lies on the other side. I'm going home early today. I need to know. His heart pounds in his chest as he grabs his keys, the weight of his decision sinking in. Will he find the answers he's been dreading? Or will he shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved? Daniel enters the house quietly, his footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. His heart races as he hears voices coming from their bedroom. His pulse quickens. His stomach tightens. He moves slowly down the hallway, his breath shallow, and he reaches the door to their bedroom. Through the crack, he can hear laughter, low voices, and then a sound that stops him in his tracks, a soft moan. The door is cracked just enough for Daniel to see. Emily is there, and so is Lucas. The sight is a punch to the gut, a physical blow that knocks the air from his lungs. He stands frozen, unable to move as he watches Emily and Lucas in an intimate moment. His heart sinks, his worst fears confirmed. The room goes silent in an instant. Emily and Lucas freeze, their faces registering shock, guilt, and a deep awareness that they've been caught. Daniel doesn't speak, doesn't move. He just stands there, the weight of betrayal crushing him. Emily, Lucas. His voice is barely a whisper, but it's enough. The trust they had, the bond they shared, it shatters in that moment, beyond repair. Daniel stumbles back, his chest heaving as the reality of what he's seen sets in. The life he thought he had, the love he believed was unshakable, has crumbled in an instant. He can't breathe. The silence in the room feels suffocating. How? How could you do this? The words barely escape his lips as the weight of everything crashes down on him. The anger, the heartbreak, the disbelief. He can't stay here. Not now. Not with them. Without another word, he turns and storms out of the house, leaving Emily and Lucas standing in the ruins of their betrayal. The door slams behind him, and the silence that follows feels like a death sentence for everything they once had. Daniel storms into the house, his anger palpable. He stands at the threshold, his voice trembling as he demands an explanation. Emily tries to speak but stumbles over her words, clearly guilty. Lucas, caught off guard, can only look down, knowing the confrontation has reached its breaking point. Daniel's voice shakes with fury as he confronts them, shattering the fragile silence in the room. Emily attempts to justify her actions, explaining her loneliness and emotional disconnection, but her words only seem to dig the wound deeper. She talks about the struggles in their marriage, but Daniel can't understand how this betrayal was the answer. Lucas, equally cornered, tries to deflect blame, mentioning the cracks he saw in Daniel and Emily's relationship. He claims it was the distance, the growing tension, that led to what happened. Daniel is unable to process the words, each revelation exposing the hidden fractures in their lives, ones he never knew were there. The confrontation grows increasingly intense. Daniel, feeling the weight of years of trust slipping away, turns on Lucas. All the resentment, the silent anger, and the frustration built up over the years now comes pouring out. Daniel accuses Lucas of betraying him, not just as a friend, but as someone who had become part of his family. Lucas retorts sharply, accusing Daniel of neglecting Emily and their friendship. The argument escalates, both men shouting at each other, each one blaming the other for the ruin of their once solid relationship. Their years of camaraderie, now reduced to harsh words and accusations, are left in ashes. The tension boils over when Daniel shoves Lucas in a raw moment of anger. Lucas, just as angry, retaliates, and what was once a verbal confrontation turns into a physical struggle. The room, once filled with laughter and warmth, is now a chaotic battlefield of emotions. Furniture is overturned as the two men clash, each consumed by rage and resentment. Emily, desperate to stop the madness, cries out, pleading with both men to stop. Her voice cracks with the weight of her guilt, but her pleas only serve to fuel the fire further. She tries to separate them, but the emotional damage done is beyond her ability to fix. Her attempts are in vain as the argument spirals out of control. In the chaos, Lucas stumbles backward, losing his balance. He falls, his head striking the corner of a nearby table. The sound of the impact echoes through the room, and everything goes silent. Emily rushes to his side, her sobs filling the silence as she realizes he is no longer breathing. Daniel stands frozen, his rage momentarily replaced by shock and disbelief. The weight of the moment sinks in, and both of them are forced to confront the irreversible consequences of their actions. The room is filled with the deafening silence of their realization. Daniel and Emily stare at Lucas's lifeless body, the gravity of the situation sinking in. The once perfect lives they built, their relationships, and their trust are now shattered beyond repair. Emily's cries of anguish blend with Daniel's dawning horror as they both understand the magnitude of what they've done. The scene ends with the heavy realization of the lives they've destroyed and the choices they can never take back. The room was suffocatingly silent, except for Emily's ragged sobs echoing off the walls. She knelt beside Lucas's lifeless body, her hands trembling as she cradled his head. The warm glow of the lamp cast long shadows over the chaos, highlighting the overturned furniture and the dark pool beneath Lucas. Daniel stood motionless, his wide eyes darting between the scene and the door, as if he could will himself away from the nightmare. Emily's sobs grew louder, her words tumbling out incoherently. Lucas, no, no, this can't be real. This can't be happening. She looked up at Daniel, her face streaked with tears, her expression pleading. Daniel, what do we do? What did you do? Daniel snapped his head toward her, his voice tight and sharp. What I did? Don't you dare put this on me, Emily. His voice cracked under the weight of his emotions, a mix of anger, guilt, and panic. Emily's eyes flicked back to Lucas, her voice now a whisper, trembling and fragile. We have to call someone. The police. An ambulance. Someone has to know. No! Daniel's shout cut through the air, startling Emily. He moved closer, his hands trembling as he gestured toward her. Do you have any idea what'll happen if we call the cops? They'll think we killed him. We'll go to prison. Emily shook her head furiously. But it was an accident. If we explain, Daniel barked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Explain what? That I shoved him? That he fell? They'll see the bruises, the blood, everything. Do you think they'll just take our word for it? Emily's shoulders slumped, her sobs subsiding into quiet hiccups. Her mind swirled with doubt, her desperation clawing at her chest. She met Daniel's frantic gaze, her own eyes bloodshot and hollow. So, what then? We just pretend this didn't happen? Daniel hesitated, the words forming on his lips before he forced them out. We clean this up. We make it go away. No one has to know. Emily recoiled, horror etched across her face. No one has to know. He was your best friend, Daniel. He was. Her voice cracked, and she bit down on her trembling lip. I know what he was, Daniel snapped, then softened, his tone pleading now. Emily, please, if we don't do this, everything we've built, our lives, everything, it's over. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily gave a reluctant nod, her body trembling as she wiped her face with shaky hands. Fine, but I'll never forgive myself for this. Neither of them spoke as they began the dreadful work of hiding the evidence. Emily fetched cleaning supplies from the kitchen, her legs barely carrying her. Daniel dragged Lucas's lifeless body toward the back door, every step feeling like a dagger to his conscience. Emily scrubbed at the bloodstains with furious determination, her hands raw from the chemicals. Tears blurred her vision as she muttered under her breath, "This isn't real. This isn't real." Daniel returned, his face pale and gaunt. Together they worked in a haunting silence, their only communication through brief, grim glances. They repositioned the furniture, restoring the room to its former twisted semblance of normalcy. The carpet, though faintly stained, no longer bore the glaring evidence of their actions. Lucas's body was wrapped in a tarp, lying out of sight in the garage. As dawn's first light seeped through the windows, Emily collapsed onto the sofa, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Daniel stood by the window, staring blankly at the horizon, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. "This changes everything," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel turned to her, his face shadowed and unreadable. "It already has." They exchanged a final, tense glance, the weight of the shared secret anchoring them to a grim new reality. The sunlight crept higher, illuminating the room that had become their prison, marking the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. The jogger spotted it first, a dark, crumpled form at the edge of the park trail, partially obscured by underbrush. His breath hitched, and he stumbled to a stop, instinctively pulling out his phone. "Hello, 911? There's a body here. It's not moving." Within minutes, the area was cordoned off, yellow tape fluttering in the morning breeze. Detectives swarmed the scene, their faces grim as they surveyed the body. Lucas's lifeless form lay twisted, the blood at his temple stark against his pale skin. Detective Harris, a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye, crouched near the body. He gestured toward the bloodstains smeared faintly on the ground. "This wasn't an accident," he murmured, his tone cold and certain. "We're dealing with something else here." Daniel and Emily sat side by side in their living room, the air thick with tension, as Detective Harris and his partner, Detective Lowe, questioned them. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. "We haven't seen Lucas in days," he said smoothly. Emily, however, was a different story. Her hands gripped the edge of the couch, knuckles white. Her voice trembled as she spoke. He stopped by last week, just to talk." Detective Harris's gaze lingered on Emily for a moment too long. "And what did you talk about?" Emily hesitated. "Just things. He was going through a lot." Harris's eyes narrowed. "What kind of things?" Daniel interjected, his voice firm. "He was upset about work, that's all. Nothing unusual." The detectives exchanged a glance before Lowe closed his notebook. "We appreciate your time. Don't leave town. We may have more questions." As they walked out, Harris turned to Lowe. "She's hiding something. Did you see the way her hands were shaking?" In the precinct, Harris reviewed the couple's statements. "Their timelines don't line up," he said, circling key inconsistencies. "And that woman, Emily, She's barely holding it together. Lowe nodded. We'll keep digging. Something doesn't sit right. Back at home, Daniel slammed the door shut, rounding on Emily. What the hell was that? Emily flinched. I didn't mean to mess up. Didn't mean to. Daniel's voice rose. They'll see right through you. You're acting guilty. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. I can't keep lying, Daniel. It's eating me alive. Daniel grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm. Listen to me. If you break, we're both done. Do you understand? Both of us. The detective's breakthrough came from Mrs. Walker, an elderly woman who lived across from Daniel and Emily. She sat in the station, her voice tinged with curiosity, as she recounted her observations. Lucas and Emily? Oh, I saw them together plenty of times. Walking, talking. Sometimes late into the evening. Harris leaned forward. Are you sure about the timing? Absolutely, Mrs. Walker replied, her tone resolute. The last time was just a few days ago. They seemed close. Armed with the new information, Harris and Lowe confronted Daniel and Emily. Mrs. Walker has been very helpful, Harris said, his voice steady but sharp. She mentioned seeing you, Emily, with Lucas. Frequently. Emily's breath hitched, her face flushing. She's mistaken. Daniel cut in quickly, his voice tight. Harris leaned back, his expression unreadable. Mistaken, huh? You should know. We're very good at finding the truth. We'll be in touch. As the detectives left, Emily slumped against the wall, her chest heaving. They know, Daniel. They know everything. Daniel didn't respond. He stared out the window, his jaw clenched, his mind racing. He knew the walls were closing in. The only question now was how much longer they could keep their crumbling facade intact. Daniel lay motionless, his gaze fixed on the darkened ceiling, the clock ticking in sync with his restless thoughts. Sleep evaded him. The vivid image of Lucas's lifeless body refusing to fade, each moment replayed like a cruel loop. Emily's trembling hands, the silence that followed, and the cold, undeniable finality of death. His mind spiraled further. The memory of Emily's closeness to Lucas clawed at his composure. What if she can't handle this? He thought bitterly. What if she tells someone? The question festered, planting seeds of distrust he couldn't uproot. Emily had retreated into herself, spending long hours behind the closed door of the bedroom. Daniel would catch glimpses of her as she emerged, her face pale and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She barely spoke, avoiding his gaze, her silence suffocating. Emily, he said one evening, his voice sharp with frustration, you can't keep locking yourself away. People will notice something's wrong. She looked at him, her expression distant. I just need space, Daniel. To think. To think about what? He pressed, stepping closer. How to make things worse for us? Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing, turning away. The distance between them was no longer just emotional. It felt insurmountable. The unspoken tension soon seeped into their every interaction. A disagreement over dishes spiraled into a shouting match. You could at least try to act normal, Daniel snapped, slamming a plate onto the counter. Normal? Emily shot back, her voice trembling. There's nothing normal about this, about any of it. His patience wore thin. If you keep acting like this, you're going to slip up. Is that what you want? To ruin everything? Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she stormed out of the room. Daniel clenched his fists, his unease morphing into a smoldering anger. The breaking point came late one evening, an argument ignited by a misplaced set of car keys. You're always so careless, Daniel muttered, searching the counter. Emily froze, then turned on him, with a venom he didn't expect. Careless. Careless is what you were that night. You're the reason Lucas is dead, Daniel. Her words struck like a slap. What did you just say? You heard me. She spat, tears streaming down her face. Your anger, your recklessness, it's all your fault. His expression darkened. Don't you dare pin this on me. You think I don't know why Lucas was here in the first place? Your little secret brought him into our lives. Emily recoiled, but she didn't deny it. The accusations flowed freely now, each one more cutting than the last. You were supposed to stand by me, Emily, Daniel said, his voice low but shaking with anger. Instead, you betrayed me with him. She glared at him through her tears, and you destroyed everything we had with your rage. Look at us, Daniel. We're finished. We've been finished since that night. His silence spoke volumes, a grim acknowledgement of her words. Whatever bond had held them together had unraveled, thread by thread, until nothing remained. Daniel grabbed his jacket, his movements stiff with fury. Where are you going? Emily asked, her voice hollow. Anywhere but here, he replied coldly, not sparing her another glance as he slammed the door behind him. Emily sank to the floor, her sobs echoing in the empty house. The weight of their shattered life bore down on her, leaving her in a silence far heavier than the one that followed Lucas's death. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched the locket Lucas had given her, a small, damning reminder of the secrets they'd shared. The walls seemed to close in around her, suffocating her with the weight of her choices. Every noise in the house, the groan of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, felt amplified, accusing. Her thoughts churned violently, replaying the night of Lucas's death, the sound of his body hitting the ground, the crimson stains spreading beneath him, and Daniel's furious, breathless expression were etched in her mind like a haunting tableau. I can't live like this anymore. The thought echoed until it consumed her. The decision came suddenly, a desperate impulse she couldn't suppress. Grabbing her phone, she dialed the police. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the words spilling out in a torrent of emotion. My name is Emily Reeves, she began, her breathing uneven. I need to report a death. It was an accident, but I can't keep this inside anymore. The officer on the other end pressed her for details, and Emily's voice wavered as she continued. It was my husband, Daniel. He lost control. He didn't mean to hurt Lucas, but he did. Tears streamed down her face as she offered fragmented explanations, emphasizing her own helplessness, casting herself as a victim trapped in circumstances beyond her control. When detectives arrived, Emily's account shifted subtly. She painted a picture of Danny's temper, his unrelenting jealousy, and how Lucas had only come to help her through a difficult time. Daniel always thought there was something more between us, she said, her voice trembling. But Lucas was just a friend. He came over that night because I was scared of Daniel. Detective Harris leaned forward, his pen scratching across a notepad. Scared of what, Mrs. Reeves? Emily hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. He's been different lately, angry. I didn't think it would go this far. Her words were carefully chosen, deliberate. Enough truth to be convincing. Enough omission to protect herself. Daniel was midway through a presentation at work when the police stormed in. His colleagues exchanged stunned glances as two officers approached him. Daniel Reeves? One of them asked, his tone firm. Daniel frowned, lowering the projector remote. Yes. What's this about? You're under arrest for the death of Lucas Graham. You have the right to remain silent. The words blurred in Daniel's ears as they handcuffed him. Wait, what? This has to be a mistake, he protested, his voice rising. I didn't do anything. The officers ignored him, leading him through the office as whispers rippled through the room. Faces he'd known for years stared at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Daniel's face. He sat alone, his head in his hands, replaying the surreal events of the day. Emily's betrayal burned like a fresh wound. She told them. The realization was both devastating and enraging. She turned me into the villain to save herself. Detective Harris entered, tossing a file onto the table. Your wife's statement is pretty damning, Mr. Reeves. Care to explain your side of things? Daniel's voice was hoarse, his frustration palpable. My side is that my wife is lying to you. Lucas's death wasn't premeditated. It wasn't even my fault. Harris tilted his head. Then whose fault was it? Daniel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. Hours later, Daniel's mugshot was taken. He stared blankly at the camera, his eyes devoid of their usual spark. The weight of betrayal, of loss, of a life unraveling, etched lines into his face. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone in the now empty house, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through her phone. She saw the headline before she could stop herself. Local man arrested in suspicious death case. She set the phone down, her hands shaking. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel lay awake on the cold, lumpy mattress of his prison cell, staring at the cracked ceiling as memories of his former life haunted him. The laughter, the arguments, and the moments of love that once defined his days now felt like distant echoes. The stark silence of the cell amplified every regret, every poor decision, forcing him to relive the night of Lucas's death over and over again. Each clang of the iron bars reminded him of his irreversible fall from grace. In the solitude of his confinement, Daniel found himself unraveling the choices that led him here. He saw how jealousy had turned him bitter, how anger had consumed his judgment, and how pride had blinded him to reason. The image of Lucas's lifeless eyes haunted his mind, a reminder of his culpability. Determined to seek some form of redemption, he began writing letters to Lucas's family. In his trembling handwriting, he confessed his guilt, expressed his remorse, and acknowledged that forgiveness was not something he expected. At the same time, he threw himself into small acts of kindness within the prison walls, repairing furniture, assisting others with reading, and trying to find slivers of purpose in his broken world. Miles away, Emily sat in a dimly lit apartment, drowning in her isolation. She had moved to a nondescript town, hoping to escape the judgment and whispers that followed her betrayal. But the guilt clung to her like a shadow, haunting her every waking moment. Nights were spent staring at old photos of Lucas, Daniel, and herself in happier times, the memories now tainted by the choices she had made. Her actions, once justified as self-preservation, had left her hollow and alone. As days turned into nights, Emily began to see the true cost of her decisions. She realized she had traded love, trust, and connection for a fleeting sense of safety, only to lose everything she once held dear. Her life became a grim reminder of the consequences of betrayal, and each passing moment deepened her regret. In the end, both Daniel and Emily were left grappling with the wreckage of their choices. While Daniel sought redemption through small acts and heartfelt apologies, Emily was consumed by the weight of her guilt. her loneliness a reflection of the life she had destroyed. Their story was a cautionary tale of the corrosive power of betrayal, the destruction wrought by unchecked emotions, and the heavy burden of seeking forgiveness in a world where some wounds could never truly heal.